Okay, let's see how we can solve this problem. Suppose that you have a map with a scale of 1 inch representing 100 miles. Then you trace a state on the map onto a 1/4 inch graph paper. So the grid lines are a 1/4 inch apart. And suppose you find that the state takes up about 108 squares of graph paper. That means that occupies about 108 of those little tiles, right? Tiles. A 1/4 inch by a 1/4 inch. Now, what is the actual size of the state? So let's start with 108 squares. The goal is to be able to convert that into inch square, right? The actual size on the map itself, inch square. And then the real size of the state is in mile square. So do you think you know what to do? So how do we convert squares into inch? The squares, those tiles into inch squares. So let's ask, how many squares are in 1 inch square? Remember, each of this little square is only a 1/4 inch apart. So an inch square will have 16. Do you see that? So 1 inch square has 16 of these boxes. So in order to convert into the 108 squares into inch squares, we take 108 divided by 16. Because there are 16 squares in 1 inch square, right? And if you divide, you will get 6.75 inch square. And that makes sense, right? Because 1 inch square has 16 squares. So 6.75 inch squares will have about 108 squares. Alright, usually you can see, each of them there is 16, and then here you can see 5 inch squares already. Another half and half will make 6, and there are 3/4 of it. Alright, more or less 6.7 inch squares approximately. Okay, now let's continue. We are supposed to convert 6.75 inch squares into mile square, right? The actual area of the state. So how do we do that? So of course we need to convert to find out 1 inch square represent how many miles square. Do you think 1 inch square is equal to 100 miles square? Actually 1 inch square is equal to 100 miles times 100 miles, right? Because 1 inch times 1 inch is equal to 100 miles times 100 miles, and that makes it a 10,000 miles square in 1 inch square. So the answer will be 67,500 miles square. That's the area of the state. Okay, let's do the unit fraction method. 108 squares is same as 108 squares times a unit fraction, which is 1 inch square is equal to 16 squares, right? So that will form a unit fraction. Another unit fraction will be 10,000 miles square divided by 1 inch square will also equals to 1. That is the conversion from the map to the actual size. So if we cancel the squares and squares, we cancel the inch and inch squares, we will end up with mile square. And if we do the division and multiplication, we will again get the same answer. Alright. So another way is, suppose we do not have the conversion, you can also see that 1 square is actually a 1/4 inch times a 1/4 inch. And 1 inch times 1 inch is actually equals to 100 miles times 100 miles. Again, if you use this, you will end up with the same answer. This time, the answer is obtained by 108 times a 1/4 times a 1/4 times 100 times 100, and the unit is left is again mile square.